tell me when it's live.
It's up and going.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yep, you got about 20 seconds, I'll be right back.
All right. All right, I have 6 o'clock, so I'll call the June 24th Long Lake Township Planning Commission meeting to order. Can I have everybody rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can I get a roll call, please?
Here.
Murphy. Here. Vanera.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Paulson. Here. Bott.
Here.
Brochet.
Here. Next item is approval of the agenda. Is there any changes? Or otherwise, I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve the agenda by Murphy and support from Sievert. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda's approved. So everybody got their microphone on? Might take a little bit of finagling, but, you know. Next up is conflict of interest statement. Does anybody have a conflict with tonight's business? Seeing none, excuse me, move on to our first public comment period. Anybody may speak for 3 minutes. Just need your name and address and tell us what's on your mind.
Ron Schultz, 9980 Crescent Shores Road. I'm not pleased with what you're coming up with ADUs. You're creating the same situation that short-term rentals did. The township's gonna issue building permits or land use permits, the county, in subdivisions that don't allow, just like the short-term rental issue was. And the poor residents are gonna have to fight it out of their own pocket. Now, it appears that someone has already won a suit against a resident for a short-term rental. Those are gonna back up onto the township. So what you've done is doubled the density on every lot in this township. Whether it's in a subdivision that maybe only requires a 1 acre lot, now it's a half-acre lot, because you've created another home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tina Allen, 10120 Deer Path. So I actually would like to speak in favor of the accessory dwelling units. There's a couple reasons. I work with homelessness programs, and in that we see that there's just not enough housing, especially smaller housing for starter homes. I also helped the county do a study many years ago, but the one thing that everybody could agree on in that study was that we need places for our young family members to live. Everybody wanted their kids to come back here and have a place to live, and everybody wanted to be able to live here when they get older. So we're in a situation, I'm older, by the way, and my kids are already grown, but I want to make sure that there's opportunities for them, and being able to use the same structure and the same piece of land in particular can be really beneficial for them. I do have just a couple little question, or things though that I didn't like in particularly about this ordinance. And the biggest one is that it was for 30 days or under. That still seems really short to me. I'd rather see at least 90 to 60, because I agree with Ron, that if you make it too short, it can become a short-term rental. I'm looking for homes, and so that, I'd like you to consider that. I already talked to Cody about a measurement thing, that question that I had, but, so as long as I've lived here, so it's been 38 years, there's never really been a place for me to end my life. There's not, there are some condos and things now, but I have a perfect one-bedroom apartment on my house, and then some upstairs, and the basement is a perfect one-bedroom apartment. And I'd like to be able to be where I could stay in my home, and either somebody lives upstairs and I live downstairs and they take care of me, or the other way around. So I think as we have an aging population, which we do, I'd like you to consider that for them and me. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina.
Pete Springsteen, 3929 Cedar Lake Road. I want to speak on two topics. One is to support Sherry in her work on the tree issue, and to let her know my wife has agreed to volunteer to be on the committee with you. She just hasn't signed up yet.
Excellent.
My wife's a master gardener. The second is ADUs, and I would speak in support of ADUs, but also I think that some form of regulation to prevent the problems that have been discussed is a good idea. I hadn't thought of the 90 days before, but I think that's a reasonable thing. But I am a little bit different in that I have a really large piece of property, and having the ability to have a smaller home, the property that I could age into, where my son and his family, who have 4 kids, could move into the larger home, kind of the old family farm where the older farmer, I'm not a farmer, moves into the small house and they flip-flop houses with ADU. But I'd like to reiterate my request that you consider a way to have people have more than 960 square feet. Whether that's by right or whether there's some mechanism where you have to come back to this board for the permission to do that, because it's not something you do for everyone, but you would do in certain situations or circumstances. So again, I think the things that were discussed last time that you have in your agenda packet, and you've addressed about trying to make sure that you do it in a way that doesn't take, a home subdivision and make it a 200-home subdivision, and also doesn't make it really short-term rentals. I think that it's really just, my assessment would be the ADUs are for people who are going to be there, not coming and going. So,
Thank you.
Chris Crew, 3016 Collier Road. On the ADU thing, I think it's a good idea. I think there are some things that need to be considered, like the 2 physical homes on a property that's 1 acre. That 61-acre parcel or 61-home unit that just got approved, within a short period of time could be 122 homes. So somehow or another, there's got to be some form of constraint to disallow some of this blossoming thing, that you would end up with a detached duplexes essentially on this. Now you've turned, as was mentioned, a 1 acre conforming into 2 half-acre essentially non-conforming, and you would not have let that go and get an approval. The other thing too is the 90 days seems like it's a little bit more, it's a little less short-term rentals like. I could guarantee that somebody that has an ADU is going to rent it out for 30 days, and 2 or 3 family members are going to share that 30-day period. Especially if they got some small place, especially in this area. So they could split the time. 90 days seems like a little bit more of a logical rental period. And then lastly, there was some expressions, I think Mary Schatz at one meeting said that she has a rental property that's on her thing. They're talking about putting another short-term or another building on as an ADU, and it'd be 2 rental properties on the same thing, which is not what you wanted to do necessarily. Everybody wanted to have a home to age in, and then a home potentially to let somebody help them age or bring in a family member. Secondly, activity center topic is coming up again. I would encourage you to remember that master plan input 2 years ago had a boatload of people who were talking about wanting activity center input. And the activity centers Sherry was at one, Kevin was at others, nobody else did participate at any point in time in the meetings that were held for input. And there was a lot of people here with a lot of input, and it took, you guys spent money with Networks Northwest, they spent time, you had people on site, you had people collecting, a lot of people put time into that, and letting it go just because 3 non-resident business owners didn't like it might not be the way when you've got a bunch of other residents who are very adamant about the way that they want the township maintained. Tree ordinance, I'm not going to be here for the first one. And then the multi-family dwelling, I may be misunderstanding, but I'm not certain I understand what the concern is with having 2 families live under one roof, especially if they're not renting, unless it's tied to essentially what looks like an ADU with 2 separate sanitation systems and that kind of stuff. If I had parents that needed to live with me, why do you care if 2 families live in my house? So that's it. I might be close to my 3 minutes.
I think you're right at 3 minutes. Thank you. Anybody else?
I'm Linda Carps, 8787 Pheasant Run. I live in Glenwood Waters, which is 1-acre parcels, and I can't imagine the noise, fire, smoke, fireworks, etc., from additional doubling families on the properties around me. I've got issues with one of my neighbors especially, and I can't imagine it having more people like that nearby. And if you want to do this for 5-acre parcels, I moved into a single-family subdivision for a reason, out of the city, because I like my peace and quiet, and, that's getting taken away every time something else is passed. Another flight is announced that's coming to Traverse City because I'm right in the flight path as well. So, anyways, I just wanted to let you know. I think the ADU conversation needs to be discussed much further. There's too many questions and not enough answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think Kay's the only one left. All right. We'll close this first public comment period. Move on to our next item, approval of minutes. That'd be from our May 27th, 2025 regular meeting. Are there any changes or corrections that we need to do? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve them.
So moved.
Support.
We have a motion to approve the minutes by Murphy and support by Wind. Is there any further discussion? And all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item, excuse me, postponed business. Zoning ordinance amendment 03-25-01, a proposal to amend zoning ordinance number 109, section 2.7, section 3.2, section 4.28, and articles 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, and 14 to regulate accessory dwelling units and create standards and design requirements for eligible properties. It's continued discussion from previous meetings. I guess, Cody, you want to catch us up?
Yeah, I can give us a brief update real quick on where we're at. So the public hearing for this zoning ordinance amendment was held in March, I believe. We've continued to talk about it at subsequent meetings when time allows. Just a little background, the original intent to discuss this was found in the master plan, and just to read it to you, it says, update ordinance to allow for guest homes / accessory dwelling units / tiny homes in appropriate locations with rigorous standards to protect single-family residential character of the township while expanding housing choice and providing missing middle housing opportunities. Such units not to be available for short-term rental use. So that's kind of the starting point that we started at. We had an ad hoc committee that met this winter to discuss some of those regulations in more detail. But under that intent. Last meeting, we had extensive conversation about it. Commissioner Sievert submitted some questions, and specifically questions 2, 3, 5, 7, and 12 were left open to revisit for today. Those questions had to deal with architectural standards, size, PRE, modular / tiny homes, and registration. So to further the discussion, those are some of the topics that have been discussed most recently. We also discussed last time about the minimum size in a lot of our zoning districts has a 24 by 24 core living area, which would make 576 the smallest under the current regulation. And then I was educated today that our zoning ordinance has to be a little more specific as far as minimum floor area goes, because right now our zoning ordinance doesn't specify that single-family dwellings have a minimum floor area. It says that all dwellings. So we'd have to adjust that slightly to meet your wishes as far as size goes. A little bit of follow-up for you regarding the enforcement of the PRE portion of our discussion. Originally, after leaving the ad hoc committee, there was a line in the draft language that said owner-occupant must occupy either the ADU or the principal dwelling unit, and they must be eligible for a PRE, which is a principal residence tax exemption. After going through legal review, legal suggested that we take the PRE portion out of that, as it would, in their opinion, violate the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. So it was removed before bringing it in front of the full commission. Some of the other discussions we had on enforcement specifically is regarding registration. Some of our neighboring communities have a registration of ADUs. After discussing with those neighboring communities, they don't really do anything with their registration list. They just keep it as a tally so they understand where those ADUs are at. But as far as enforcement goes, it's not necessarily utilized as maybe it was intended originally. I did call a few other townships in our area asking specifically about the PRE, because if our legal is saying that we shouldn't add it, but they have it, I kind of wanted to understand how they would go about enforcing it. And to be honest with you, our neighboring communities don't necessarily have a good answer for that either, as far as enforcing the PRE portion of it goes. Specifically, things like if a homeowner has a principal and an ADU and they have a PRE, but then they sell it and the buyer of the new home doesn't have a PRE, doesn't obtain a PRE, the only real recourse the township has is litigation in order to remedy that. And that's what legal is saying, that they don't believe a judge would hold up because of the violation of the Michigan Zoning Act, or Zoning Enabling Act. And then the last thing that I was going to bring up from a staff perspective is to kind of rationalize the demand that we're expecting. In conversation with some of these neighboring communities, one of the questions I asked was, how much demand do they actually see? And honestly, the best answer I received was currently the largest factor prohibiting ADU development is cost. For an existing principal dwelling, they would have to either excavate or install a new septic, which is quite costly, plus the cost of building materials. So demand is highly dependent on homeowner, I guess, feasibility of cost. So those are some of the updates I wanted to remind you about, also answer some of the questions that were brought. I guess lastly, before I turn it back over to you guys, the other main topic that we were discussing last month was regarding architectural standards. We'll get into the specifics here when we look at the other dwelling unit types we have under item 10A, but if you read ahead through that, we currently have language in the multifamily and the two-family dwelling units that regulate that the dwelling units mimic or match certain architectural standards of other dwelling units in their area, so that it would be kind of similar to what we were discussing last month. So I know that's a lot that I just ran through, but we can kind of take it one by one if you guys have questions through that.
Thanks, Cody. I guess, how do you guys want to go through this? Start back at the top of the list, where we
Further questions?
what's that? The question lists?
What Cody was saying, questions 2, 3, 5, 7, and 12 were the ones. that-
Yeah. So for item 2, you mentioned architectural standards. We have language that addresses that for the multifamily or
We do, yeah. Let me pull that up here so I can read it to you verbatim. So right now in our dwelling 2-family, which is a duplex, and dwelling multifamily, which is 3 or more, we have a regulation that says scaled elevation drawings depicting architectural features shall be provided. In an area of predominantly single-family homes, and multiple dwellings shall be designed to resemble one-unit dwelling and shall include architectural details found on the majority of the dwellings in the neighborhood, so that the multiple dwelling is consistent with the aesthetic character of the existing buildings. So I know last meeting there was some discussion about whether or not you wanted to regulate how an ADU would look, and I would provide this as an example of how previous planning commission members have decided to do that with something similar.
Are these documents in this month's packet updated per the comments for the attorneys?
So the summary insert that I put in depicts one of the changes we had discussed last month with clarifying intent language, and I listed that there. Everything else was a carryover. I believe in that summary insert it says continued attachments, which is what you would have seen last month, and then the new attachments are additional, and those are listed. But no, I did not include the specific language from legal because it was a legal review that had asked us previously, or we had done previously and discussed previously, and typically I don't put the lawyer's words verbatim in there for attorney-client reasons.
Clarification, I know our attorney is indicating or is recommending that we can't have the language of a PRE. I guess I'm confused, if we can't limit that they need to have a PRE, how are we going to actually be able to execute, and when I'm looking at one of the charts you put in here, that every one of these situations has to have the principal residence, or in some cases, they will also allow the accessory, one or the other, to have the owner occupied. And what's the difference of I mean, if you're going to enforce one, I mean, I guess I'm not understanding, and I guess you're not the attorney, but...
The reason, my understanding is the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act does not allow us to treat dwellings different within inside of a zoning district. So if we have low-density residential, we have to treat every dwelling in there the same. So we're not allowed to treat somebody's dwelling who has a PRE different than somebody who doesn't. So we're treating them the same across the board. So irregardless of if you have a PRE or not, the draft language is stating that they're going to have to reside in one of those buildings on the property.
So we can have that in the draft language, you're saying, or we cannot?
Yes, so when the lawyer took a review of the draft language, they did not ask us to remove that. They thought that that was legal in nature.
Basically, that's just indicating intent, but it's not enforceable.
It'd be very difficult to enforce. The question would become, what does reside mean? Do they have to be there for 2 weeks out of a year? Do they got to be there for 11 months out of the year? What's the term? It'd be very difficult to do so.
A typical rental contract requires, there's.
I'm going to switch you out mics real quick. I think that
Thanks.
one's a new one, so.
Good.
And no, I'm not going to do a Broadway show tune while I'm up here, so. See if that was better.
A typical rental contract requires a 1-year lease, and then usually after that, it's month to month. Is there any reason not to do that?
That's an option. You could long-term rent both. Just the current draft language that came out of the ad hoc committee, they felt more comfortable with a owner living on the property. But there's nothing legally, there's nothing against us allowing both to be long-term rented.
I'm just, aside from the issue of the owner living on the property, I'm just asking that in relation to overcoming the short-term rental issue. Because if somebody wants to rent a house, a typical contract is a year, and it's not typical that somebody would want to rent for less than that, except maybe if they were a traveling nurse or something. I guess that would be a special case.
Sure. Right now, the only thing we define differently is we define short-term rentals as less than 30 days, and everything else is just considered a long-term. So we don't necessarily have anything on the books dictating time frame.
So in other words, if we wanted to vary from that, we would have to insert some new language or describe it differently.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. I do have one other question that's not related to this. If a homeowners association, say in a new subdivision, has a rule against, basically, in effect would outlaw ADUs, in other words, only one residence on a property, and it comes down to enforcement of the HOA rules as opposed to the township rules, can the township rules override the HOA? The reason I'm asking this, if an HOA doesn't want ADUs, they can simply change their bylaws to state that.
Correct, yeah, but the township doesn't enforce HOA regulations or deed restrictions.
No, I'm not asking that. All I'm saying is that if, say, an HOA put into their bylaws that no ADUs are allowed, the township couldn't force that.
Correct, they can be
Okay.
more restrictive.
Okay.
Just like an HOA or deed restriction can get down to the granular level of telling you which materials you're allowed to use in your house or what color it can be. It's an agreement between the folks that have signed that document, so they're allowed to put any restrictions on themselves that they wish to do so.
Right. So in other words, the HOA can't override the township rules, and the township can't override the HOA rules.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Cody, would you reread, in your opening, you outlined what the sub-area master plan, I believe, the master plan is updated, gave a priority to look at ADUs and gave some direction on it. Would you reread that again for me?
Yeah, I can. It's just for future reference, if you want to find it, it's under our phasing of objectives under item B for housing. It's item number 4 for anybody who wants to pilfer through that. It's also on page 90. It discusses updating the ordinance to allow for guest homes / accessory dwellings / tiny homes in appropriate locations with rigorous standards to protect the single-family residential character of the township while expanding housing choice and providing missing middle housing opportunities, such units not to be available for short-term rental use.
Thank you. So one key thing, we got a lot of details and there's different comments that are coming up, and there's, to me, many key things that we need to look at in terms of protecting the township, and questions over size, architectural standards of things, and the questions that we've got outlined here today. But I guess in my mind first, I think the big thing to try to tackle is that element of we want to protect the single-family residential character of the township. So how do we do that when there's some questions that come to play of what we can enforce in terms of PREs? What can we do in terms of not having a 61 residential neighborhood, 1-acre lots turned into 122? I think we need to me, that's kind of the starting point. How can we protect that? If we can get that protected, then what do we do for size? What do we do for architectural design, in those types of things? But if we can't get that part protected, I have a hard time spending a lot of time on all the other areas, which will have to happen. I think we can get there, but I think most importantly, how do we do that? How do we put in place really the base of what we're going to do to say, and I guess as I'm looking at the spreadsheet that you've put together here for us, Cody, I assume you created this, that looks at what the townships around us have done. And, right out of the gate, you've got, what have we got, 2, 4, 6, about 8 townships. And the second line that you have there is for use. And when you look across that, every single one of the other townships around us only allow this to happen in certain districts. We're right out of the gate talking about doing it really in all districts under certain criteria, but do we want to look at what districts really can and can't have ADUs, and how do we limit so we don't have 61 neighborhood subdivision 5 years from now or 10 years from now turn into 122. I think we need to figure those elements out, and then once we can make sure that we're not going to be overrun by, like we are in some cases where STRs have become a little bit of a problem in some pockets, and we're open as a township to having that continue to become a problem, and we know that there are problems in other communities for both ADUs and STRs. To me, the first thing we need to do is protect the quantity. And even if over time that opens up to be something more or opens up to more districts, I would like to entertain the conversation of, if we're going to do this, how can we do this from the standpoint that it's not going to be immediately open and overwhelming to us over time. If it needs to be open more, let it open more, but how can we do something that allows it to be appropriate? Is it 5-acre parcels? Is it, if a new subdivision comes in that we've just approved and they've got 61 1-acre lots, is there a limit of no more than 5% or 10% in that subdivision can have ADUs? I'm not saying those are the solutions. I'm just thinking, how do we come up with some kind of ability? And I realize, what's the demand? At this stage of the game, are we going to get overrun? Probably not, but why leave it open until we get overrun? Let's say this is what we can allow to have happen, and then someday we decide that we want to get overrun and we open it up a little bit further. So I guess that's my thought of where I'd like to kind of spend some time and figure out how do we at least make sure we don't become overrun with a problem, that we open up, allow it to be able to occur, and then once we know we're not going to let it be overrun by the numbers we put in or limits we put in, then inside of that, what are the architectural designs and sizes, how big or small in certain situations. I don't know if that's a place others feel comfortable to start the conversation, or everybody just believes keep it wide open like we currently allow in our draft.
A sense of direction I'm kind of looking for. You mentioned quantity. We also, quality as well. I mean, there's a lot on our plate here. There's so many different scenarios. And were all these items discussed at the AUD committee meeting? I don't remember any minutes from the meetings or anything. There's just a lot here. The plate's full with us. If anybody can let me know, I just don't remember.
Yeah, each line item was, sorry to jump in on you, but to answer your question, each line item was discussed at the ADU ad hoc committee, other than the one the lawyer took out about PREs, and they were all communicated through the minutes that were brought to the entire planning commission after each ad hoc meeting.
And including everything we discussed at the last meeting?
Well, the ad hoc committee was completed before the last meeting that we had.
Right, well, I just meant all the different scenarios, I guess, where they laid out.
No, staff has not created you like an à la carte menu with every scenario we've discussed.
No, I meant the members of the committee. There's just a lot here to digest, and to me, and I don't want to go back in time, but it kind of should have been laid out at the committee meetings.
So at the
a lot of
committee
this
level,
stuff.
just to kind of level set of the process that we used, we started with the neighboring community ADU analysis that was created in October. We went through each of the kind of main pillars of an ADU ordinance that we found regionally, and we discussed them. We discussed use at length, we discussed size, number, off-street parking, et cetera, down to kind of get a general idea at the first meeting of what the intent was. Staff then took that and compiled ADU language that we had at the second ADU ad hoc committee meeting, and we refined that further and then sent it off to legal for review before bringing it in front of you. So the three members of the ad hoc committee, along with some public and staff, worked through those pillars as we went through. That does not mean that they can't change in some fashion now. That does not mean that it has to be adopted as is. I mean, we're still working through it, so.
I got it, yeah.
Kind of to just circle back real quick and educate a little bit, Kevin was asking about different ways to fulfill draft language to better match the intent and not get too open before kind of feeling out how things are working. Normally, those are restricted in some fashion either by zoning district, so only allowing it as a permitted use in a particular zoning district that the planning commission feels is appropriate. Sometimes communities will do it based on density. We currently don't have any density requirements in our zoning ordinance. Some communities have like, you're only allowed so much impervious surface per lot. Some communities do it by number of units, so they don't want to see 2 units, a dwelling and an accessory on the same lot, so they only let you have it inside the primary unit. So there's no detached option, it's only an attached option. Those are different types of mechanisms that folks will use, or even lot size, which we address slightly, but the only way we address it is that it has to meet the current zoning ordinance size. So those are common ways that they use to regulate ADUs.
I think it would be useful. At one point, you had said that there were only a certain number of lots that even qualified in Long Lake Township for an ADU. There was a percentage, as I recall. A lot of the lake lots are not. I think so.
If I speak up, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, currently in the draft language, the way that it's stated in there is in order to qualify for an ADU, you have to meet minimum lot requirements for your zoning district. So for example, lake lots are notorious for being smaller than an acre. So a lot of lake lots wouldn't qualify for that. But as of the total number that qualify, I don't remember off the top of my head. I think the metric I gave last time is 98% of our lots in the township are used for a residential purpose in some manner. Of the types of residential buildings and dwelling units, 92% are single family. So 9 out of every 10 buildings that somebody resides in here is a single family dwelling, way, shape, or form. The others would be duplexes, tris, fourplexes, or like an apartment unit like the H72.
The second thing that came to mind as you were talking is that one of the concerns that I'm hearing is we're just going to end up with a lot of little houses and it's going to look tacky, just to put it frankly. One solution to that might be in an R1 district only to allow attached ADUs. You know, basically just a separate entrance and a separate kitchen that's the only difference you would see from, I mean, you wouldn't see any difference from the outside basically. And in R2 to R5 or whatever, agricultural, detached ADUs might be allowed. That would be one way to approach it. I'm reluctant to say, I mean, if a subdivision, if an HOA wants to pass a deed restriction or a bylaw that says no ADUs are allowed. I don't, that's their choice. But I hate to, from our position, say some people are allowed to have them and some people aren't. But if we can do it in a way that doesn't, make the township look like a jumble of little houses, I think we should attempt to do that. So just tying whether it can be attached or detached might be one way to.
I agree with Dan on that. I don't think, if you say only certain residential districts, why does one person get to have their mother-in-law or their, family, elderly parents live with them, but someone else doesn't because of they're on the lake or because they're, in a certain district? I don't, that kind of defeats the whole purpose of having an ADU ordinance, I think. And when you start looking at size, if you go to 5 acres, that eliminates 90% of the houses already, so you don't even need the ordinance at that point. They can just split off an acre and build a house.
I don't disagree with you. I think the intent behind the ADU is to allow a different housing option across the board is the way I'm interpreting it. But allowing some folks to do one thing and not others is kind of how zoning works, unfortunately. For like a layman's to look at it, allow some districts to do something and some not do others.
Yeah.
I think residentially speaking and housing-wise, they are more similar across the board when it comes to single family. All those residential districts allow single family concurrent. ADU seems to be accessory to that, so I would agree that there seems to be a discrepancy if we just start tailoring it by district other than by district size or lot size.
Right.
One other thought in terms of districts, you say allowed in all districts, but I guess a challenge I would, to at least discuss. I understand around most of our lakes, we have a 1 acre minimum and many lots don't meet that criteria. That being said, we still have many lots that do have more than 1 acre, but may still only have 100 foot of frontage. And part of the 100 foot of frontage was an issue of making sure there's not too much pressure on the lake. If you've got, I would argue that, or suggest that if you've got a 1.5 acre lot, you're on the lake with 100 foot, and you put a second ADU on it, you're probably going to have additional boats out front and additional people making use of it. So is that something to at least think about when you look at districts and say, okay, within the lake district, if we really don't want more pressure on the lakes because we don't want to do anything to the water quality, which is important throughout our master plan, is there another element that needs to be considered for lakefront? So if you've got 200 foot of frontage and only one home, and you've got more than the 1 acre, then maybe you qualify. But if you've got 100 foot of frontage, you can't have a second ADU, so that way we eliminate that potential problem. And I don't know what other, I guess I'm just trying to think what other situations in other districts that could be an issue. Again, infrastructure. We've got many neighborhoods right now that the roads are in terrible shape. Whole nother issue that the township's looking at and will be coming to grips with going forward, or at least intends to. But if you've got neighborhoods where the roads are really very deteriorated, and we have a handful of those, and now all of a sudden we allow ADUs, and then you've got more use, understand, the idea that how do you let one individual do something and not another individual in a district. But if your roads and infrastructure can't support it, I think that's an element of whether or not you can, put more homes on and put more pressure on that infrastructure. I don't know how you deal with that.
Those roads probably aren't our roads. They're probably private roads.
Well, that's actually not true. We got quite a few county roads that are, right now there's not a mechanism to actually take care of them. And the county's not doing it unless there's significant contribution from the neighbors, which is why many of these neighborhood homes, streets are in absolutely terrible shape. So there is a thought other townships are doing. I know our township is loosely looking at, we're off on a tangent here, but to do some sort of a millage that would take care of county roads that are not through roads, but neighborhood roads, and how do you maintain those. But I would be concerned if I'm in a neighborhood where the roads are very deteriorated, and we have many, and now all of a sudden there's going to be 10 more homes going into that subdivision with how many more cars a day using those roads. So I think we do have some things
Well, I
to
don't know
think
the
about.
answer to that. Are they homes or are they ADUs? And are they, if it's your elderly parents, how many more cars is that going to be?
Right. As long as we get
Or
all the-
boats, or
right.
jet skis, or...
Sure. But things to think about in terms of if we're trying to,
Yeah.
trying to protect the
Yeah.
integrity of the neighborhoods.
I agree.
We need to think about those things because we could make decisions here that would hurt the integrity of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think it's important to consider because we're talking about, kids that haven't grown wings yet or parents that are older and need to be taken care of. But one of the other goals of this ordinance, as I understand it, is to provide affordable housing, and
Right.
that is going to bring in more pressure on the systems.
That's true.
But we have a responsibility to maintain the roads regardless of who lives there or how many houses there are.
Right, and so that's a separate issue that needs
Just
to be dealt
briefly
with.
to touch on that, yeah, just to kind of wrap it up into one, I guess, two little sentences, is the township, the planning commission and the township board gets to dictate the use of township land. We don't own any township roads, so the Grand Traverse County is tasked with maintaining all public roads, and private neighborhoods are tasked with maintaining their private roads. So we, a lot of the times, will approve a use of a land that will increase the use of the roads, and we don't necessarily have any mechanisms currently to address that, I guess. We do it all the time. It's kind of standard practice, but it is kind of one of the big juxtapositions is we don't have roads to maintain, so we rely on a relationship with another entity in order to do that. Okay, maybe more than two sentences, but...
And I'm not proposing we come up with a way to manage that piece. That's not something we can do from here.
I don't know how you do it, right?
No, my point is, it's an issue to be concerned about as we, factor in what we're going to do with in terms of ADUs and where and how many and how that would work. Again, I don't know the solution.
Okay.
It's just a concern we need to be cognizant of as we're beginning to build this out.
So to move forward on this, could we take, for example, our low-density lot, typical lot in this township is 1 acre, is that correct? Okay. So
Yeah.
could we say anything that's an acre or less? Because there are others that could be conforming or less than an acre, or is there anything in?
Moderate density and high density have smaller lot sizes.
Okay. So we take, and as a starting point here, because other things will figure into it, like setbacks and so on, size of septic fields and so on, which are going to limit some people from doing anything. So if we take 1 acre lots and say anything an acre or less, which I don't know if there is anything less, you said there may be, has to be attached. And anything greater than an acre, because we have conservation, zoning and whatnot, then it could be detached. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that's the way it's written right now.
The way that the draft language is written is irregardless if it's attached or detached, the zoning lot of record has to meet the minimum for that zoning district. So in low-density residential, your lot would have to be at least 1 acre, and you could build an attached or detached.
Right, and medium and high density doesn't qualify for ADUs.
Currently, under the draft language, it does.
Okay, so you're saying right now, 1 acre, low-density residential, you could have it attached or detached?
Under the current draft language, that's correct.
Okay. But if we say it's attached, then some of the other concerns about having extra buildings in a subdivision like the 61 that's going in here, if it has to be attached, because if we specify 1 acre or less, it has to be attached. That would solve some of the problems. Now, if it's being attached, it also has to fall within those setbacks, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So that would solve a lot of problems there, because there's other issues. You're adding bedrooms, what have you. You're going to have to add, it's going to have to meet the standards for septic and so on, the county standards. So that would solve a lot of problems right there, or concerns that you have.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding, you're saying if it's any 1 acre lot conforming, your suggestions would have to be an attached. It'd have to be greater than 1 acre
I'm saying,
to go
look
to
at this
an
as a
unattached.
starting point to see if that relieves some of the concerns.
Right, yeah, and that's what I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding. Yeah, so if it has to be, so in other words, what we just approved, the 61 acre lot, those are all 1 acres. That area kind of falls off of being a detached, but they could have an attached ADU in that setting. Yeah, that begins to, because then the setbacks will fall in, there's other things that would probably.
Setbacks.
Well, the lot sizes
Septics
probably
and so on.
vary, so they're not, some of them are going to be 1.03
Oh,
acres. so they're gonna
exactly,
be-
yeah, so you're still going to get variations within
Right.
it, but what you're not going to get is a
We can
completely
dissect
separate
this
home.
for
Yeah.
the next 100 years.
Right.
Never
Right.
come up with anything.
Well,
Yeah.
Right.
right, but if you say in low-density residential, low-density residential is kind of defined as a 1 acre lot, isn't it? So,
Yes.
so if we say in that zoning situation, if we had to make them attached, then it wouldn't matter if it were an acre and a half, it's still zoned the same, right?
And that's good for new development, but for an older home, I don't see the point of having it attached.
I think what you guys are getting at is it's a density question. So you don't, what it's sounding like, what I'm hearing, is you're not wanting 2 dwelling units on a lot less than an acre because that density then more than doubles what's currently allowed.
That's not the way I understand what we're
Okay.
saying. What I understand we're saying is, yes, somebody in an R1 can have an ADU, but it has to be attached so that we don't end up with little houses sprinkled all over in a confined area.
Okay.
Right.
Correct.
That's where I was going with that. Am I not?
No, I think that's a good idea.
It was, pardon?
You're on.
So anyway, that's where I was going with it, was because you brought up this issue, I think you brought up the issue of the same subdivision, that you don't have a lot more individual units there. Plus, there are going to be limitations as to how many lots can do it, depending on what they want to have as a home to begin with. So there may not be room by the time they're done to have a separate unit, even though it's attached. Not a detached unit, but a accessory dwelling unit. Because it's going to have its own entrance, it's going to have its own parking,
Right.
things like that.
If there's a fairly large house on an R1 lot, and they want an accessory dwelling unit in there, they wouldn't even have to put an addition on. All they would have to do is put in a separate entrance and a separate kitchen, and then they have an ADU. So they're not being excluded, but at the same
Right.
time, we're preventing this sprawl.
Right.
And by nature, that would probably keep things a little bit smaller in that situation. You're not going to have as many cars, but
Yeah.
mom or dad, grandma, grandpa can move
Right,
in,
right.
you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish.
I don't think they would need it. You don't have to have a separate entrance,
No.
do you?
No, under the zoning laws, you can't put in a separate kitchen and a separate entrance, but if you don't, I mean, if you just have your folks move in with you, there's no issue.
Right.
But I think some of it is you'd have your folks move in with you in the same building. You're there for care, but they'd have their own kitchen, their own bathroom, their own
So the
bedroom.
way it's defined in the zoning ordinance is complete independent living facilities. So if you
They
have
can't have their own.
a kitchen, a bathroom, a bedroom, and a kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, all sequestered from a different portion of the house, it's considered an ADU. Our zoning ordinance does not currently allow that. If you have folks move in with you and live in your basement, but you still have a free-flowing pathway through the house, that's not considered a complete independent living facility, so.
Right, so that takes care of the comment of if family wants to move in with you, they can move in. We're not going to monitor if there's technically 2 families living under the same roof, if there are.
So, yeah, that's another issue that we'd have to address here, and we can address it later, but we do have a definition of family in the zoning ordinance. It's 3 unrelated persons or related folks, and I don't know how we'd ever enforce that. I mean, we're not asking for birth certificates, so I'd be very difficult to do, and to be honest, there's a lot of communities getting away from that definition.
Sure.
Just because family takes on a different meaning to a lot of folks, especially from 1900 to 2025, it's a different meaning for folks, so.
But conceptually, if we go to this ADU in the same unit attached, we have separate accommodations for the key living elements, that would allow the ADUs and grandma to move in. It's going to limit probably the amount of traffic and cars and all those types of things, but it would also open up the door for the family then to be there, whether you've closed it off or not. We can come up with that language to say, okay, I don't need to close it all off and let my parents move in downstairs. I can let my parents move in, close it off, choose not to close it off, and either way we can somehow accommodate that, depending on what any individual wants to do with your parents moving in with you.
Prioritizing and incentivizing attached ADUs would keep the aesthetics of that home more similar to a single-family dwelling unit than if you were to allow detached units.
And again, I have nothing against anything with a 62 home. It's a great example because nobody's living in the subdivision right now. But to me, that accomplishes, if we're trying to have, if we just approve 61 homes, 1 acre because we want that kind of neighborhood situation, that's what we just approved for the reasons we approved it. We don't, in my opinion, want that to turn into 122, but we can have ADUs if we leave it attached. So I think, I'm just talking it all through here, but to me, it seems like that's down the path that, feels like it accomplishes both ends of what we're trying to do, protect the neighborhood setting, not have a bunch of sprinkled in additional homes, but still allow the family in, or non-family. I mean, we're at this point, we're saying, granny flat, but it also can open it up for your kids or somebody else's kids to have a bedroom or two to have affordable housing in that situation.
You could do that. You could do that either through zoning district or size, right? Because certain districts there's only 2 districts that are less than an acre, right? High density and...
Moderate and high are less than an acre.
So you can just make moderate and high, it's got to be attached, and
You could,
the rest of them it doesn't.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have to do it by size.
sure. You could do it by district, for sure. You could also do it by lot size, is my understanding, as the Zoning Enabling Act allows us to restrict certain uses based on lot size as well.
Okay.
We don't have that much high density in Lomé Township, and I would have qualms about allowing ADUs in high density because it's already pretty dense.
It's already high density, yeah.
We also currently allow duplexes and/or multifamily dwelling units in moderate and high in both a permitted and a conditional stance. So there are methods for folks to build a either duplex, triplex, quad, or greater in those areas as well. So there's not necessarily maybe the need like there would be in a single family or conservation rec or ag, those types of things.
Right.
For the sake of the conversation again, so now if we're talking about a situation where it's a detached or an attached ADU would be permitted under the guidelines that we've loosely been talking about, and I'm the guy trying to limit so we're not out of control on this, but I'm going to ask the question. So if we're in low density and it happens to be a 0.7 acre, why do we still care as long as they're staying within the guidelines of the home and the size and the square footage to have an ADU in that? Is there a reason that lot has to be, is the lot an issue, or as long as you're still within setbacks? Back to your comment, why are we going to let some do it and some not? Just
Right.
because, a lot is less than an acre, as long as you're going to stay within the attached version of what we're talking,
Right.
is there a reason that wouldn't be permitted just because the lot size is smaller? But if you're still within your setbacks and you can accommodate a bedroom, a living room, or a bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom, and have it separated off, why does that acreage? I'm just asking the question.
Right.
Not that I want to find ways to add more, because I don't, but just so we're having the conversation. Why does the lot size matter?
I think most of our non-conforming lots are on the lake, aren't they?
I would assume.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. I'm not sure we want to overload the lake.
Right, and I absolutely agree. So, yeah, and so with that point, and my point earlier in terms of the 100-foot lot, maybe we actually do, again, like many of the other surrounding communities have districts that have different things permitted. Maybe the Lake District has a completely separate set of what ADU can, or maybe an ADU just can't be in a lake setting unless there's, certain criteria that we felt was appropriate.
You also have the option of the mechanism of a permitted use versus a conditional use. So a permitted use, somebody would fill out an application and come in and talk to Matt and get approved based on a set of criteria. A conditional use comes before you, seven folks, and they have to still meet a set of criteria, but they also have to meet the intent of the master plan as well, and provide site plans like you do on bigger developments. So you do have that option in different districts if you'd prefer. So something like a lake lot, like you're discussing, you might choose to make that a conditional use because the seven of you would like to approve it first before they're allowed to do it. Generally, the rule of thumb is things that you'd like to incentivize and make easy for a resident to do, you permit, or because it doesn't have very many regulations, you permit as a use by right. And things that are a little more environmentally sensitive or need further investigation, you would do a conditional land use, and the seven of you would take time and review each individual application that comes in with that.
Yeah, so maybe that's what we do, is have a conditional situation in Lake District to accommodate that, because many of those lots, part of the thing is those lots are also, everyone's going to be different. Some are going to make perfect sense, like holy smokes, yeah, why wouldn't you permit that? And others, but it's probably going to be lot by lot when you think about the different lots because of the layout of the lake and how things have been done over time. And so maybe we do have a Lake District that has conditional use applied to anything that happens there, but everywhere else you'd want to make it as easy as you could, I think, to come before staff.
With a conditional use, the applicant would still be burdened in showing that they meet certain criteria, so you'd still have to have criteria for them to meet, but it could be more restrictive than a permitted use.
Would it make sense to have all non-conforming lots conditional?
I don't know that we're allowed to distinguish that, to be honest with you. We'd be able to do it by district, but not by non-conforming, because non-conforming lots are allowed to continue the use they have on that property as long as they don't expand it outside the footprint. So
but if that's true, an ADU is not part of the historical use.
That's true. How would you?
It's an accessory use.
What are the setbacks?
Even if you got 3/4 of an acre on a lake lot, when you have room to put up a barn, you can put up a barn. It's all that comes in setbacks.
Right, it would come within setbacks, but if we wrote this ordinance such that a non-conforming lot would require special use permit, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, is there?
Yeah, I think you can. The way it's currently worded basically eliminates that as an option. It says you have to be a conforming lot size, but if you wanted to open it up to non-conforming lot sizes, you could make it a conditional. I think that's kosher.
Conforming lot size was just because that was a quick and easy way to do exactly what it sounds like you're not trying to do and have a million, especially on the lot. Well, 70% of the lots right there.
Right.
At least 70.
When we discussed it in the meetings, committee meetings, the idea was to make it cleaner, safer for the lake. It was one of the things that we talked about, but we felt that a conforming lot made it easier throughout the whole thing to do this and take away the problems and not have overcrowding. So I think if you start doing an overlay of conditional in one and not conditional in the other, it's more of a problem in my view, but.
So you still leave it as if it's non-conforming, you just can't have an ADU attached or
That's the way we were
unattached.
talking about from the beginning, yeah. And that's the way this is written, is it not?
No. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I would probably still tend to agree with that, but I would still probably want to look at anything on lake and still have that be a conditional land use, so that way those are looked at. It's depending on the lot. And again, back to use on the lake and what you're doing, trying to protect the water on any of the lakes around here. I think that would probably still make sense. And we did talk about is there a way to come up with a number? I mean, part of this, we spend all this time. Can we come up with a number of how many lots are conforming, non-conforming? What are we even talking? Is there an easy enough way to come up with that from any data that we have in the township that says there's X number of lots on lakes in the township and this many of them are conforming? So we would actually know what we're even talking about. We might be talking about something that's hardly worth spending time on, and we're going to...
Yeah, sort of. So we have a GIS software where I can query each lot based on size. So I'd have to go in there by district, select all the lots by that district, and then say, what's your size, sort A to Z, divide by how many are greater than 1 versus the total, and that would tell me how many are conforming and how many aren't for the lake districts. So yes, I guess is a short answer to that question. It takes some finagling.
That would only be size though, right?
That would only be size, correct? It wouldn't be shape, it wouldn't be, it would just be area in general.
But would know the non-conforming by size, which
Yeah,
would
probably
be the biggest issue, and would then have an idea of what we're talking about.
My question to you would be if at number 70% or 85%, does that change any of the regulations you're looking to put upon it?
Yeah.
And if it does, that's completely fine. I can provide you with those metrics.
And I guess the question would be if we looked at all lake districts separate and said, okay, those would all be, if you're on the lake, you're gonna come with a special land use permit. I mean, it's gonna come before here. How many are we talking about? Is there, I guess that would be an interesting piece, or how many would, have to come before this board? I mean,
That'd be dictated by demand. I mean.
Right, but at least we know the size of the, I mean, are there 100 of them or are there 500 of them?
I don't know.
That's where it would be interesting to know the size of the potential workload that we'd be putting on if you made it a special land use permit in lake districts.
Matt, I've heard you say 70% a couple times. Okay, just checking.
That's a, I would say a guesstimate. I think you have enough experience to understand.
I bet it's more than that.
Yeah,
I bet it's 80 or 85%.
And those are which lots? I'm sorry.
I don't hear it.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Over the years, yeah.
And that's the easy going on. When I get a phone call, hey, can I have an ADU? First thing I do is pull up and we don't have an acre. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is in the district.
Right.
Add to conservation regulations.
So we could say you'd need to have more than an acre. That way, everywhere we're approving low-density 1-acre lots, if you're more than an acre, then you've got a potential, even though some of these I realize end up going a little longer, and that's fine. If that's what they've done, they've, for whatever reason in the development, created a 1.2-acre lot because the way the road layout happened, then you're going to get a few, but you're only going to get a few at that point.
We could muddy it out more and say the gross or net acreage. Because the road right away, you don't own that.
I guess we need to be clear on that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, let's make a note for whatever that's got to be included.
We did.
Okay.
Well, if you approve a subdivision with 1-acre lots, they're all going to be larger than an acre because they won't be smaller than an acre.
Right. There you go.
So I think we're all kind of like on the same page of looking at, a limit, size limit, district limits for when it's detached, and then when you're above that, you could have undetached as well. So I guess as far as kind of redrafting some language, is that something that we could go with? I mean, are you able, Cody, to kind of formulate our conversations and what we've been talking about into draft language to move it forward? Or
When it comes to use by district and lot size, I think I have a somewhat decent handle on the 7 or few views that have been discussed, so I can draft something up that will mimic that, and we can kind of use that as a starting point. And I can also provide you with conforming counts by district. I can do that query and see what I get for each district. I can see what lot sizes or how many approximately, just based on gross area alone, how many fit that. So you have a little more information to make decisions with.
Are we giving you hours, days, or weeks to come up with that number? Those numbers worth of work?
The mapping side of it I can do rather quickly. It's less than a day's worth of work for me to pull that, if everything works correctly, but we all know how technology works as judged by the microphones tonight. So, yeah, it's not an avalanche by any means.
To me, it's valuable to have an understanding of what's the size of the issue we're dealing with.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's apparent to me that the wish of the township is to promote ADUs in general. And I think if we know the number of non-conforming lots, if we're going to divide between attached and detached, it would be really helpful to have those numbers. And if they could be emailed to us before so we can come prepared to the next meeting to make a decision, that would be great.
Of course. I can include that in the packet before I send. I'm trying to get that to you earlier and earlier, but sometimes I'm waiting on outside forces.
But I want to make sure that we're not, that if we're going to exclude less than an acre lots, there's a good reason for it. If we don't need to exclude them by having those units be attached, I think it's worth exploring.
Okay. Just from a process standpoint, I don't remember if it's in the Zoning Enabling Act or the Planning Enabling Act. You guys have held a public hearing for a zoning ordinance change. You are allowed to string that along as we'd like to make a decision, but the problem becomes is if we change that text drastically from when we held that public hearing, we need to hold another public hearing so public has the right to speak on that. Some of these changes we were discussing tonight seems like we're moving in a direction where we're going to change it drastically enough that I would argue we would need to hold another public hearing to do so. That being said, there's a draft resolution that's in your packet tonight. If that's what you'd like to do, I would suggest that you vote down that resolution number with the items listed stating that you're looking to amend that text further and hold another public hearing. That'd be the proper procedure way to move about it, and then we will go through the noticing practice again. In order to do that from a procedure standpoint, I would say recommend voting down that resolution tonight. At your next regular meeting, we will have draft language, I guess. We'll further refine the final ordinance language, and then at the following meeting, we'll hold a public hearing so that we can get public input, and then you guys will have the right to adopt it at that. So it would be 2 meetings out from adopting language, pushing it to the board. So if you guys are okay with that, that's what I would suggest from a procedure standpoint.
It's like everything. Oh, there we go. I would prefer to have as much public input, especially if we're making enough changes. I see no reason to push this so fast that we don't let public know there's been enough change. So I would absolutely encourage that we do that. But I think we've got more than just what we've done with attached and detached and what we're going to do, maybe breaking out lake districts separate. But I think, we still got to talk about architectural and size and those things here too, before we say we're like 2 meetings out, unless we're going to get enough of it in, or we put maybe a work study in or something to, depending on how quick we want to move it. I don't know how quick everybody.
Sure. The last meeting you guys asked about doing a special meeting specifically for ADUs. Some items that were on today's list got moved, and so I just made a decision to put ADUs back on today. We do have a budget of the number of meetings we can have in a year based on our allocated budget from the board, so I was kind of reserving those.
Sure.
We can decide to have a special meeting if you so choose. But I agree that 2 meeting was just an estimate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I just don't want to rush it. I mean, yeah, whether we do special
Right.
meetings to keep it moving, or I don't know how much pressure we have, or we just allow this to happen over time. But I think it's going to take time to get through each of these here yet. I think the architectural one is going to take time, and size, we haven't even gotten to that here yet tonight of if there's any.
And then practicality too. Just looking at Zeeland Township or city, they have the homeowner shall prepare a deed, restriction or other instrument to be reviewed by the city attorney. I don't think we've addressed any of that.
There are some There are some jurisdictions that require applicants for different uses to register with, so for ours, it'd be the Register of Deeds for the county. They require them to put it in the deed to basically be a disclosure for the next buyer of that property, meaning like currently the mechanism is if you have an ADU, you can't have an STR under the current draft language. So some jurisdictions take that as far as you have to put that in your deed at the county level so that the next buyer understands that they can't do that. We currently don't have that practice at all in our zoning ordinance. Some other jurisdictions find it useful. It's kind of up to you whether or not you want to include something like that.
I just had a thought, we might not want to do that because it becomes marketability then. Could be.
Yeah, and that's the other portion is we can't enforce the actual deed, so I don't know
Right.
how that would work.
And you can't enforce the principal living in the house either.
Not practically.
Right.
It's really the responsibility of the seller to fully disclose. It's not our responsibility. Right.
Buyer's responsibility to understand the ordinances that might affect them when you buy it too.
So if we are going to vote this down tonight, there are a couple of other issues I think that we need to discuss just to prepare you. One of which is, the way the ordinance is written right now, the minimum size is 250 square feet, and I think that has to go up to 576, right?
Yeah, unless you put a special exemption under the ADU that doesn't have to meet district minimum livable floor area dimensions. Which is one or the other has got to give. So you either got to keep the 250 and we got to make a change in the district verbiage, or we got to change the minimum to meet that.
From my perspective as a builder, having built tiny homes for people, anything below a 25 by 24, people become disenchanted with eventually.
Sure.
It's not my call, but I would be in favor of not changing the size ordinance and just raising the minimum size to 576. The other thing is that if our maximum size is 960 and the minimum is 576, if somebody wanted to build a 24 by 24 and have an attached garage, I'd like to make an exception to the detached, or the...
Yeah, I got you. So right now what Commissioner Paulson is stating is in the draft ordinance language, we treat any non-habitable space as an accessory building. So if you have a garage attached to your ADU that's detached from your house, it's treated like an accessory building. So if you have a house, a detached major accessory building, and you've maxed out your accessory buildings, if you built a detached ADU, you would not be able to build a garage on it with that current draft's language. So what I'm gathering from Commissioner Paulson is you're saying if somebody decides to make a livable floor area of 576, which would be the theoretical minimum, that gap between 576 and 960, would you then allow them to build a non-habitable space like a garage to fill that 960 square foot?
Exactly. I think it's an important consideration it's Northern Michigan, and particularly if we're intending to, if part of the intention is to house older people, I just think a garage is important. There are too many people who slip on the ice that are older that I think a garage is just an important safeguard for them.
Is the intent of the minimum also for detached? So that, if somebody wants to add on to make it an attached ADU, are we enforcing that the minimum size of that addition is 576 square feet?
Yeah, under the current regulation, it'd be 250 right now, under the current draft, but you could choose to make a minimum for a detached different than the minimum for an attached, which might make sense. If you're trying to make a small granny flat in the bottom of a house, you might not have. Okay, so let me reiterate what I got so far before we move on to architectural. Yep. But next meeting, staff's going to bring you analysis of conforming lots by district, which is the first thing. But more importantly, for the draft language, we're going to draw up potential options for like a permitted use versus conditional use. Change the minimum for a detached to 576, which is a 24 by 24. Change the minimum for an attached to nothing, I guess, or 200, or a metric of some number. And then also look at how the current district regulations are worded so that they all jives together. Am I missing anything before we? Am I missing anything?
I think that covers it.
Okay.
Did you see it? Okay.
And just for clarification, we're talking the difference between permitted versus conditional would be kind of with the lake?
Just kind of show you how that mechanism would work, so you can
Okay.
make a more informed decision on whether you'd want that to be. Because if we have I guess I'll just demonstrate it so everybody's a little more clear on what that burden of proof would be for an applicant if it's a conditional land use.
Okay, so you won't be, will you bring back language that would separate district, so basically like a lake district separate from other districts?
I can use that as an example, and we can go from there.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think what we should consider also, it may be in the Lake District that somebody may develop an attached ADU without increasing the footprint of the house.
Sure.
So I think we have to allow for that possibility.
I think you might do that by, you would do that, but the thing you'd have to be careful of running into is if that principal dwelling got less than 960. So our current minimum is if you start eating into that principal dwelling, then you start getting closer to that 960. So there's just a few things at play. But.
Yeah, that's important to consider. And when I thought of that, I was thinking of a larger house that...
Sure,
yeah.
makes sense. Yep. I'm tracking.
We can move on to the next item related to this.
I get back to my first page here, we should probably, I guess, if we can, before we move next, give me time to get to the page here, we make a motion to,
Well, wait a second, was there more to, like, architectural standards? Are we just gonna tackle those at the next meeting, or?
That's up to you guys how you want to handle that, but right now, when we left the last meeting, there were still questions regarding architectural, so that's why I kind of brought it forth. If you'd like to address it further, I would suggest addressing anything else you'd like to deal with for ADUs, and then make your motion to vote your resolution.
I would like to deal with size, maximum size, because that's going to be a major consideration.
Okay.
Architectural is a little more leeway. I think because we're talking about conforming, possibility of conforming in 1 acre being attached and so on, we should be talking also about maximum size for detached. Sure. Or attached on more generous lots. Maximum size. Yeah.
So current draft language puts that at 960. The reasoning behind that, and I know there was some discussion at the ad hoc meeting, is right now anything above 960 is principal, anything smaller than that would be accessory. It makes it super clean. There is discussion, other jurisdictions do a percentage. Calculating that percentage makes it a little more difficult on the zoning administrator as far as which floor area definition you're using, but that's a potential. It's how a lot of folks do it to, I guess, allow an ADU based on the size of the primary.
So I'm listening to people who have been here on a regular basis, and I think we need to look at what that maximum size should be or could be and how to get there.
I would agree from a practical standpoint. I mean, a lot of what we're talking about is aesthetics and look and use of properties, and we're talking understandably on smaller lots, acre, acre-half, whatever, and we're coming up with numbers that seem to have resonated with the group in terms of size and how small you would be, and, the 960 makes sense. I question if an individual or a property owner has a large amount of acreage or land, what is that amount? I don't know. And if you've got a home that's, say, 4,000 square feet, do we really want to then see a small little 960, or is it actually going to look appropriate to have something a little bit bigger? You know, I don't think that means a 4,000 and a 3,000, but is there a percentage that you say, hey, you can have a percentage of the size come up, and it was a couple different
Well,
definitions?
if you-
It's still max. I mean, it's-
If you already have a minimum, they can be there. So you're not going to solve that problem. Aesthetics is important, I guess, but it may look funny or may not. We have to trust people to do what they think looks good on their property, not what we think looks good. But
and
nonetheless,
By architectural design, I mean from just the size. So if you
Right.
got a 5,000 square foot home, but you got a 1,000,
no, I was talking about size.
Yeah,
And
so-
I'm not thinking about architectural,
okay.
you know, I think we need to come up with a maximum and how to get there. And if it's a percentage, is that the best way? I don't know if...
So
we
right
get-
now, I mean, if you're looking at similar areas around us than that ADU analysis that we put together for you, the max that any other jurisdiction around us allows is 1,000 square feet,
Right.
which is 40 feet off what we currently have. I think I would encourage you to, the way that I read the intent in the master plan, and you guys are the ones who have the vote, so you can tell me I'm wrong, but the way I read that is we're trying to allow for a different housing type than we currently have. Less than 960 is currently not allowed in the township, so that housing type is currently going unused or unavailable. I think that was my understanding of intent, and maybe that's why that was written in there originally when I put it down, but that decision is up to you seven, so that's what I'll leave it to. My only worry behind that is if you allow all of a sudden, for a gross exaggeration, a 2,000 square foot ADU, what's the difference between that and subdividing the property and putting a house on it? There's not really a functional difference.
Right.
That's the only caveat I can see.
So do you want to hash out the size out tonight, or continue it with
Well,
the next...
are we better off to hash it out tonight? And
Yeah.
now that Matt's back, maybe he can weigh in on this, but a way to find out maximum size on the conforming larger lots. So would percentage make sense? And is that percentage of the primary dwelling? If we were to use a percentage, is that?
Footprint.
The upper level, main level, and the basement, when they're all finished, you could have a 5,000 square foot house, not very large.
Well, most everything is by the main floor. Right. Okay.
And not to make things more complicated, but if we're gonna, if you entertain something larger, which, you know, I guess I would still be inclined to talk to see if there's a way to do that, but at the same time, another thing to consider, not just size and percentage, if we're concerned about environment and those things, do we want to, and what's the calculation of how much surface do you have on that particular lot? So you've got a 2-acre lot, but do you want to have the entire thing filled impervious, or is there some percentage of the lot that can also be left impervious once you're done, by the time you put 2 driveways in and
It's definitely
homes
something to
and-
consider,
so
because
to be-
currently we don't have any restriction based on pervious surface. So theoretically, and I say theoretically because it seems kind of preposterous, if somebody had a 1-acre lot, they could build a building corner to corner on all their setbacks, and the whole lot could be a primary dwelling unit. Because there's no regulation currently that justifies them not being able to do so. Some jurisdictions worry about that, especially around environmentally sensitive areas, and so what they'll do is they'll calculate a percentage of pervious surface. Doing so is sometimes difficult in practice, but it is an option that can be done to further regulate that.
Cody, I brought up at one of the meetings that we had a lot coverage limit that was erased in 2010. Did you check on that?
I have not looked back at it. I
Yeah.
know we had a major zoning ordinance change in 2010.
Yeah, and what had happened, Tina probably remembers it. In one of the subdivisions, somebody wanted to put on a suite, and it went a few percent over, and if I remember, the Board of Trustees directed the Planning Commission to have that removed, however the process was at the time. So we don't have that, and, I mean, maybe that's something we work on in the future, but I would hate to see it hold this up right now. Because I don't know if the Board of Trustees would want that back in.
We could maybe put it in as part of an ADU. I mean, so you don't, so if you're going to add an ADU, then you've got to limit how much you could do on the lot. But not do it in general, so to
Yeah,
address
I
that issue.
would defer to Cody whether you can do it or not.
We're having some technical difficulties that we're trying to fix on the fly. Can you repeat your question for me?
So question was, we just heard the historical situation, why this township no longer has a percentage of lot space that could be impervious. Rightfully being challenged, well, do we really want to come back and do that now or have that slow this process down? But could we have a percentage of impervious limitation only for lots with ADUs? So that way we're not looking at the entire township and have that drag down that process. But if you have an ADU, then you have to, a detached ADU, then you have to limit the amount of impervious space.
I would have to double check with legal. And the reason I say that is because we're not allowed to treat dwellings different in the same district. So I couldn't treat your house different if it didn't have an ADU than my house if it did have an ADU as far as that dwelling goes. But I don't know if that stipulation pertains to the dwelling unit itself. So what I mean by that is if we put a regulation in there saying that pervious surface has to be at, it's not a good example. I don't know, is the short answer to that. I guess we'll leave it at that.
You know the gist of the question, you can maybe get an answer for
I do understand, yes. And we are able to, I know we're able to do it for every lot in a district. I don't know if we're able to restrict it for just lots with ADUs is the answer I have, but I can find that for you.
That would be great.
Does anybody have a feel for lot sizes?
ADU sizes.
I'm sorry, ADU sizes. You know, whether it should be a percentage of the ground floor of what is there existing already or what? Yeah. Or do we want to use a number?
Most of the other ordinances have a percentage, but they also say, or 1,000 feet, whichever is less, so you're still stuck at that 960, or, I mean, that's what we have. So you can say it can be 50% of your house or 960, whichever is less, it's still maxed out at 960.
Okay.
Unless you think that it should be a lot bigger than that, and then, I guess.
Well, again,
you can take out
listening-
You can take out the whichever is less, and make it be a percentage of the house. But the ones that have a percentage is 45, 52, 52, and 45, so.
To me, all kind of subjective, I guess, at this point, without having, I mean, we know what other communities have done and limited it, and we know what the concern of not going above 960 or 1,000, because those are minimum, otherwise, again, you could subdivide. So I guess that presents, does it make sense to go above that or not?
Cody on that is, once, if you start getting up to 1,500 square feet, you might as well just say it's another house.
Right.
And subdivide.
I just go back to your
Well,
intent.
That's the reason for keeping them small.
So whenever I'm trying to type up ordinance language, I always try to make it clear of intent, which you guys set for me, practical and enforceable. Like, those are the three pillars that I try to make everything. And if I'm understanding the intent correctly from the master plan and what you guys have discussed before, it's to provide a different option than currently exists. And if you get too high, then all of a sudden, you're not allowing for a different option. You're incentivizing somebody to make a larger option that they currently already could. So that's just my understanding.
I think, too, the percentage of a footprint could penalize some people, because if they got a 2 or 3-story house that's built on a small footprint, they might be limited to 500 square feet.
We have a
I think
lot of
that if
tri-levels.
somebody's, pardon?
We do have a lot of tri-levels.
I think that, just to split a lot and share a driveway might be a solution that might work better than an ADU in some cases.
I'm comfortable with a number. And
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure we discussed it.
I think that's the last thing that leaves then for me to bring you back something that we can discuss further is if there's any appetite to regulate aesthetics or architectural like we do for other dwelling unit types.
One other thing, if you could bring back, so we didn't touch on tonight, and I think is a bigger thing to get into, but are there any other examples of architectural standards? And by that, I know we've had conversation. In my mind, I'm not thinking at least that we're going to have a different standard for a particular new detached dwelling, but that whatever would go in would at least match surrounding area. I mean, that means if I'm on a farm and I've got a farmhouse and, I'm going to have different abilities to do some things, but if I'm in a subdivision that's just going in new here, 61, I'm not going to be able to go too far off of that and put up a pole barn and call that my accessory dwelling. I mean, again, that subdivision may have standards and HOA that would control it, but even older neighborhoods, probably don't want to have a pole building showing up, although maybe a pole building's fine if I'm out in farm area in a rural setting, but something that just has it comply with what is generally around, or any other ideas anybody has. But if you just bring some example languages from those, I know many communities have done some things with architectural, not to get too specific, but enough to give us something that.
Yeah, so right now, one of the verbiages that's in the zoning ordinance for duplexes and multifamily units is a stipulation that I read earlier tonight regarding it's to resemble a one-unit dwelling and shall include architectural details found in the majority of the dwellings in the neighborhood. That would be up to the zoning administrator to interpret for a permitted use, so I would assume, look at the surrounding neighborhood and say if there's a building that's made out of the same materials or the same aesthetics, then they would permit it. And to be quite frank with you, I think it would be hard-pressed to find something that wouldn't be allowed.
Hard-pressed to be what?
Find something that wouldn't be allowed aesthetically. We have a wide, diverse array of architectural homes in the area, so it'd be very easy for somebody to argue that they have a similar home to a neighbor if they wanted to make it out of a pole building material or whatever fits construction code standards.
It's so subjective.
Correct,
Right.
yeah.
Too subjective.
That's a much better succinct way of saying it than the rambling I just gave.
A lot of the HOAs have language that just say it has to match the house and color and style or something.
Sure.
Like that.
Yeah, house, style, color, material.
Forget about the neighbors. It's on your lot, it should match, or at least.
Yeah, so you could, it actually just have it.
Something like, it should
Be comparable materials to the.
Like you said, a farmhouse with a ultra-modern ADU next to it.
So maybe it's just as simple as that it matches the primary home on the residence, that it's, similar in materials, design, and standards to the home that's already there. That would probably allow enough room in a rural setting to do some things, but a different rule in any neighborhood.
Sorry to cut you off. Staff can bring you verbiage for you guys to discuss further at length for that, for sure.
Okay.
So I'm just going to recap my list real quick to make sure I'm following. So we have differences for attached, detached. I'll get into them. Minimum for size, maximum for size, conditional versus permitted, discussion about pervious surface, and the discussion about the architectural language that we just had. Am I missing any points? Perfect, thank you.
Do you have any need on the homestead exemption stuff? You're just going to leave it in there as
So right.
owner needs to reside in one of the two and leave it at that?
Yeah, so
Can't enforce it anyway, but.
enforcement from zoning ordinance is really striven and relies on compliance. We trust our residents to do what the zoning ordinance says. Sometimes it's very difficult to enforce some things, like some of this verbiage we've read tonight. So if you, Seven, would like it in there still to promote an owner-occupied dwelling on the property, then we can leave it in there. If you feel like it's not going to be enforceable and you don't want to go down that tract and you want to allow both units to be long-term rented, we can take it right out.
Or registration. I noticed some of the ordinances, they have, register, Traverse City does.
The question I would have from a staff perspective is, once we get everybody registered, what are we doing with it? Like what function are we using it for?
Right.
I just want to guard staff time on onboarding, that kind of stuff. But
I'm throwing it out for the board.
definitely, other communities have found that as an option to fulfill that. Whether or not you Seven agree with it or not, that's up to you guys.
I believe the cities, you have to re-register every year or two.
Right, and I talked to the zoning administrator in Traverse City, and I asked him what the function of it was, and he says, to keep us busy. He said, it's just paperwork. There's no practical use for it.
Are you guys busy enough?
The only thing I have to say about it is, from an ordinance standpoint, it's tough if you know that it's not very enforceable, or it's very hard to enforce, and then you put it in there anyway. It kind of hurts the rest of the zoning ordinance when it's like, well, we know we can't do anything with that, but we're going to put it in there. So it's not really enforceable. Why is it in there? That's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
Are you saying that you would rather not have the ownership requirement, or the occupancy
I
requirement?
don't have an opinion. I'm just saying.
Right.
don't think we can enforce it all, then why would we?
Yeah, I understand that it's not enforceable, but I think somewhere in there, we should indicate that the intent of this is to have an owner-occupied residence with an ADU attached to it.
It's not that it's unenforceable. It's very difficult to
Sure.
enforce, because then you get into the discussion we had earlier regarding how long is residing. Is it a week? Is it 6 months?
Sure.
That's when it becomes gray. So,
I'd like to see it left in there just because of the short-term rental idea that people might get or compare this to. I'd prefer to leave it in that it's primary residence.
I would agree. I mean, I think the intent needs to be clearer. And we have a few other things in our ordinance that are difficult to enforce,
Sure.
as is the case across the state. And when we're seeing most other jurisdictions are including that or similar, or even going as far as the PRE, which may or may not even be legal, these things are going to continue to evolve across the state and over time. And I think the more similar we are to other communities, someone's going to be challenging it. It'll become enforceable or not. Let's have it in so we've at least got the protection of an intent of what we want to do, is my opinion. And then we see how things fall down the road. But I think leaving it out would be a mistake.
I agree, and the more similar it is to other jurisdictions, the more likely it is that somebody else will have to defend it beside us.
sure. Yeah, we can definitely do that. We'll leave it in for the next draft discussion of it.
In reality, is the time to enforce is going to be when somebody's been very egregiously violating it, and that also creates a different situation. At least you've got something to come back and point to. So again, that's
And we'll need to be prepared for that, because when we did our short-term rental, we can advertise what we want out there, but if they come in and, bring 15 people in a 2-bedroom, there's no way to monitor that, or, you hear about it after and you see the effects of it after. So these, it could happen in the AUDs as well.
We have very good enforcement staff, so I feel that if you decide to leave that in there, our OEO will be more than capable of working that out.
Okay, so Cody mentioned we need to act on this resolution. I mean, can our action just be?
I can make a motion to.
Yeah, so what I'd do is make a motion to I'm assuming, just based on conversation, not to make your decision for you, but make a motion to deny zoning ordinance amendment 03251, citing the need to explore the topic further, and how you'd do that is you'd formally do it by the resolution number. So deny ZOA 03-25101 by resolution number, I don't remember it, 03-2506, I think is what it is. And then you'd have a roll call vote, and you could vote how you choose.
Before we do that, though, is it true that legally, the only way that can be brought back before the board again is by somebody who voted no on that resolution? So I'm just wondering if...
My understanding is if a resolution is passed, or if a resolution is denied, so say you have a split vote, a 4-3 vote, and 4 folks vote no on a resolution, 3 vote yes. If you want to vote on the same resolution again, one of the 4 members of the commission that voted no has to bring back that resolution language. What we're proposing to do is bring back a completely different resolution language because we're going to be changing this. And the reason we're changing this and voting no on the resolution is because we are required to hold another public hearing because we're changing so much on it. So yes, there is some with that, but we're changing it.
It sounds like we're good.
Yeah.
So the next time we see it, it would be zoning ordinance amendment with a different number?
It would be 07-2502.
Okay.
Actually, probably 08 by the time we get there, but yeah.
I will make a motion to deny ZOA 03-25-01 for the reasons discussed here this evening, with the intent to bring back a new amended ordinance to accomplish the goals that we've talked about further tonight, but would then require and allow for another public hearing to review that ordinance.
Sounds great. Using resolution number
Using resolution number... actually, I don't see...
03-25-06.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a motion. Is there support?
I support.
Support.
I think Dan jumped in.
Dan did?
Okay. So we have a motion to deny this zoning ordinance amendment as stated by Kevin and supported by Dan. Is there any further discussion? Can we get a roll call vote then, please?
Paulson,
Aye.
Seaver,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Lyon,
Yes.
Rivera,
Yes.
Murphy,
Yes.
Yes. That motion passed.
The motion to deny passed, which is
Yeah.
a bad double negative, but yeah,
Yes.
we get the intent.
We did not talk about the 30 days at all in our discussions tonight, which I know members of the audience brought up.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, when we first talked about that, it was because it's kind of the standard of a short-term rental is less than 90 days. Is it something worth talking more about, or?
I think we did talk about that tonight, and I think we did suggest that we make it longer.
We can potentially do that. We might have to add a new definition to the zoning ordinance. The reason why that 30 days is in there is because we are eliminating short-term rentals from ADUs. So that's why it references that 30 days, is because the short-term rental ordinance states less than 30 days as a short-term rental. So that's where that metric comes from. If you'd like to explore requiring further timeframes, I can ask legal on how we'd go about that. I think we'd have to add a new definition and go from there.
I think it's worth continuing
Exploring,
to talk
sure.
about. Yeah.
I will add that to the to-do list.
Good catch, Max.
All right. Moving on, we have no public hearings. We have no pending business. We have new business, item 10A, multifamily dwelling units, review and discussion. I'll just...
Yeah, that's from me. That's an agenda item provided by staff, and I will give you kind of just a brief summary of it so we can continue on with the evening. But when reviewing some of the items of the master plan, and specifically the zoning ordinance itself, staff came about, I think, I don't know if I'd call them discrepancies, but items of those, how we treat dwelling units. So just a little history. Currently in our zoning ordinance, we have 3 types of dwelling units. We have single family, which most folks are familiar with, double or 2 family, which we call duplex, and then everybody else. So if you have a triplex, you have the same regulations as somebody who's creating a large apartment complex. There are a few housekeeping items that we should address, and I will bring forth ordinance language to you to review at a later date. But my proposal to you guys, to see how much of an appetite you have, is instead of having 3 categorizations of dwelling units, single, double, and everybody else, is to make a 4th categorization, have single, double, triple/quad, so you'd have triplexes and quadplexes with their own set of regulations, and then everybody larger than that, their own. So we'd have, to create the 3-family and quad-family dwelling units so that we could further refine how we're regulating those. And the reason I say that is because I believe the way we would treat an apartment complex would be significantly different than how we would treat a quad. So that's my proposal to you. The other housekeeping items, and to clarify, I'm not proposing changing any districts or permitted or conditional uses. They would be exactly the same how we have. But some of the housekeeping items is, I tried to highlight tonight by adding the zoning ordinance. So right now, if you're building a duplex, or I'm sorry, a tri or a quad, so if you're building a multiple family dwelling unit, there's a stipulation in there that says first floor residential units shall have a 15-foot front yard setback. We currently don't have 15-foot front yard setbacks for any other dwelling unit in the township. I'm not exactly sure how it got in there. It doesn't seem to be cohesive with our other items. So it'd be cleaning up some of the housekeeping items to meet, say, district regulations or something similar. So that's what staff is proposing, is just kind of educate you. Currently what we have are 3 categories, and the proposed bringing a 4th and then bringing that language before you at a different time. But I just wanted to kind of level set where we're at here. I guess with that, does anybody have questions on what staff's proposing?
Bring it back.
Okay, can do.
Anybody else have any questions? All right. Yeah, I guess we'll look for that in the future.
Sounds good.
Our next item is 10B, Activity Centers Summary Discussion. So I'll turn it back to you to...
Sure. Just a brief history. So the Township Board and the Planning Commission identified 3 areas in the township for activity centers in the master plan that was adopted in 2024. As part of that work, the Township Board authorized a contract with Networks Northwest to create an activity center subplan. That was created and adopted in October of 2024. Since then, 7 of you and staff have explored various ways of implementing those strategies that are outlined in that activity center subplan. For tonight's discussion, I just included a brief history that I just dictated, and then I also included the current zoning maps for the north and west activity centers, which have been kind of the most investigated of the 3. So with that, I'll leave it to your discussion.
So I guess we need to figure out where we're going with this and how we're going to look at it again. Is that kind of what we're tasked to do? When we first started back after the beginning of the year, were there other ways that we could have gone about it, and we went about it, the rezoning as the path of quickest?
Yeah, there's definitely different ways to treat it. So in December, we had a meeting discussing kind of the mechanisms we wanted to use moving forward. At that time, we discussed a couple things. Probably the most paramount is whether or not to treat all 3 activity centers as separate units or try to treat 2 of them the same. And at the time, we discussed the consensus was to treat the north and west activity centers as the same guidelines and rules. Looking at those areas, we might behoove us to treat them separately. The other thing we discussed at the December meeting was making a rezoning or changing a zoning district, which was kind of the most intensive level of intervention, versus having something like an overlay zone, which would sit on top of current zoning that would regulate some of the uses or stylistic choices in those areas. So that would be a less intensive intervention than, say, rezoning would. So there are different mechanisms we can employ to implement the activity center on a spectrum of intervention, I guess.
I think that one option might be to focus on the North Activity Center, because I think that's the most amenable to this type of plan, and use that as kind of a pilot program to try it out and without disrupting the entire community over that. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but I think that it might be worthwhile to just focus on one area, and we may end up deciding, that some areas don't need to be dealt with, like the Hamlet. There doesn't seem to be any crisis there, or that certain areas might be dealt with differently. But I think to get unstuck, I think it might be worthwhile just to focus on the North Center. I think we were at a disadvantage because we were under pressure because of the moratorium, and I think that we were just a little hasty. And I mean, these processes are time-consuming. The ADU process would seem like a really simple one, but it takes time to work out all the details. And I don't think that we want to be in a position of forcing bad decisions. And I think just running a pilot program can be a real educational experience for us.
Kevin, do you have any comments, Kevin?
I often like ideas of pilot programs and looking at things in small ways and making change in small fashions where we can, and trying it on for size. In this situation, that may be, I guess, another way of looking at it is, let me keep my microphone here. I think Cody and Matt have probably talked about it in the past. Some of this is also a function of how fast are we trying to make change. And when we put the ordinance before this group and before the public, it did represent a lot of change to happen quick in terms of what the requirements were and what would happen. So one approach to making that change less is take the one that we, I'm not sure that my feeling is, and I could be wrong, I think what we had together for the activity centers the last time was probably completely approvable and ready to go for the North Activity Center. I think the pushback we had came out of the West. So does that mean we break it off and just do North separate and then have something different for West, I guess, is conversation? Or do we still look at it and say, how far off were we really in terms of what West needed? And maybe there's still a way to bundle them together if we can hone in on what the real key sticking points was for the West. So I guess I would encourage maybe bringing it back, still looking at the whole, maybe recognizing we need to break off if we find out what the key pieces were and spend time on those. If we can't remedy the ones for the West and make it work for all, I think to me it would still be the best to have one whole and have them operate similar into the future. It's just a question of what's in it and how quick that the thing move forward in the direction. I mean, so maybe the whole thing gets watered down just a little bit to make it work for West, and then everybody can be acceptable with that. Or we say, geez, we're watering this too much, let's leave North separate, let's approve North closer to what we had, or whatever that might be, and then treat West separate. I guess I'd like to bring it back and start the discussion there with the possibility of breaking both off, but let's first just talk about what those issues were, because we might find ways, I'm not sure we can't find ways to accommodate so it's win-win-win for everybody. Maybe not, but I think it's worth a little more of that discussion that we didn't fully have yet.
Well, good compromises often lose for everybody.
You're right.
Cody, at one time you cautioned us about moving too fast because of you were afraid that we were going to create some pitfalls for ourselves. Do you remember that conversation?
Not specifically, but it doesn't sound unlike me.
It's true. You were concerned that if we changed all the zoning right away, that there was some reason that you had that you thought that we should take a more measured approach to it. Do you remember what that was?
So there's a couple things behind that. So when you make a zoning ordinance change, most likely you're making somebody non-conforming, just based on either removing a use, you're probably making somebody non-conforming. If you're only adding uses, then you're not. But a lot of the times, you're making somebody non-conforming. So that makes it difficult on not only the property owner, but also the staff to regulate, and specifically that property owner is then losing use of their property. So it theoretically can devalue monetarily their property. That said, sometimes you have to remove uses in order to work towards a shared vision, like the activity center subplan is. So a lot of jurisdictions will do it on a measured approach so that they can kind of see how their interventions are actually affecting those properties in that area. The other thing for the township is specifically when we were talking about building design requirements, so taking the North Activity Center, for example, some of the Activity Center subplan speaks about having close setbacks. And though that makes sense in a slow traffic area, when you have traffic going 55, 60 miles an hour, having a 10-foot setback on a building, it could be potentially dangerous for the inhabitants of that building just because you're so close to the right-of-way. So there's certain items like that that don't make sense until either a bean-about goes in or, some other traffic calming measure is present. And then I guess lastly, the big issue that we have out here is most of our township is well and septic. So we are limited. We could allow any use in the world on a piece of property, but we are limited on whether that gets actually built because of their ability to handle their sewer. If we had municipal water or sewer, we have a little more flexibility in what we can allow and what would actually be incentivized to build. But builders typically aren't going to want to build a large building that requires a large septic field because it's significantly more expensive than if they were to just hook into a municipal sewer system. So making some of those changes, like requiring all new buildings to have a 10-foot setback, makes sense in a slow traffic area, but doesn't make sense currently. And that may be what I was getting at in that previous conversation, is slowly putting those design requirements in will allow us to kind of monitor them, and when they're appropriate, we can put them in.
Sorry.
Well,
Procedural.
Oh, go ahead.
Since we're at 8 o'clock, I guess.
I move we adjourn.
What's that?
Shall we reconvene?
I was going to say we need to either extend or wrap it up, so.
I move we extend.
Is there
I'll
support?
second.
We have a motion to extend the meeting from Dan and support from Kevin. Is there any discussion? All in favor of extending the meeting past 8 o'clock, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we can keep going now.
I think the activity center idea is a wonderful thing, and I think it's something that's important to the people of the township. But it is a fairly major movement, and I think that we need to implement it with real kid gloves. And I think it has a lot of potential, but I also think that timing is important, because until the bean-about, I never heard it called that before, that's cute, is in place, it's a plan without really roots in the ground yet. I think that really, for it to work in the North Activity Center, that traffic structure has to be in place. So I know that we were, being rushed to get it approved and laid out, but I don't know that it is wise to be in a rush.
Yeah, I think clearly there's quite a bit more discussion, but I guess I'd like to, if we could, depending on the rest of the commissioners, I guess I'd like to see it come back, and whether, I guess I would encourage to bring it back as a whole first and then decide if we want to break off. But if we could just get it back and then start with where we left off, but let's look at, can we somehow salvage what's there, and if we feel that it just can't be, then break it off and deal with one piece at a time, whether they run simultaneously or, north and south, or north and west happen consecutively. I mean, I guess we can determine that if we needed to break them off. I mean, it still might make sense to move them side by side if they're separate, but I guess I'd like to see it come back at that level and then decide to keep it as whole or break it, and then if we're going to break it, how that would look, so.
So Kevin, just to kind of comment on that procedure moving forward, the zoning ordinance change that didn't get adopted specifically was talking about changing uses in the local business district. That is only applicable to parcels that are zoned local business. So when you look at your zoning maps for north and west, if we bring back that same language and talk about it further, we're only talking about the light red or light pink areas that we're discussing. Activity centers have multiple zoning districts inside them. So it might behoove us, if that's the case where you'd like to still talk about them together, to talk more of an overlay district, which would functionally sit on top of the underlying zoning district. So it would just be another layer of regulation that the properties underneath that overlay district would have to abide by. So it'd be a different mechanism to employ both activity centers in tandem. So I would just caution you about bringing back the same verbiage only because you're eliminating that function and you're only treating part of the activity center. You're not treating them as a whole. When we were looking at it originally, we were talking about changing the West Activity Center all to the same zoning district. So functionally, it would have the effect on the whole district as a whole. In the north, it wouldn't. It would only be to the light pink properties in those maps. So just keep that in mind as a mechanism moving forward.
So if I'm understanding, we're not bringing back what we had before. We're just going to put activity centers back on the drawing board and look at potential of overlay districts or any other method.
I think you have better traction doing that. That way you guys have a broader array of options in front of you.
So basically, are you saying that an overlay district is basically those properties would be subject to two sets of zoning standards?
Yeah, kind of. So a common, the way they like to describe it in classes and such is a common practice is an overlay district on like a river. So think your river is going to go through multiple different zoning districts, but if you put an overlay district on top of that river, everybody touching that river has to have a set of criteria. So it sits on top of existing zoning. So yeah, in essence, you have another set of district regulations that you have to follow.
How does that work in real reality, though? Because the existing zoning still applies.
Correct.
The overlay isn't going to change their need to conform to that zoning.
Correct. So that's what makes it difficult with activity centers, because in some, I think it's the north has 4 different districts inside of it. So each of those properties, we could have an overlay district on, but they're still going to have to follow the underlying district that's there as well. So it makes it very complicated.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why the topic of rezoning came up in the first place, is it streamlines that process. But by doing that, you're affecting parcels pretty significantly.
Would it make any sense to reach out to the property owners in a district that we're talking about and basically having a series of charrettes or some way to engage them so that we're not imposing something on them?
So in theory, Dan, that's what happened with the activity subcenter plan. Our consultant did that. Sorry to speak for you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we already did that.
Yeah, that's theoretically what Networks Northwest did in their planning procedure.
But I do think part of what happened last time was, we considered, or we talked about reaching out, and whether it was bad advice or no advice or whatever, we didn't, and we caught flack for that.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about a community-wide charrette. Charrette's the wrong word, but I think there may be benefit in getting those property owners together that would be affected by the overlay and talking to them as a group. I don't, you know,
I disagree.
Yeah.
You can get them to come in, but
yeah.
get some buy-in from them.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a way to make things less painful in the community, we ought to try it.
So can we do that as simply as when we get this back on the agenda, maybe not the very first time, but sort through a few things ourselves, but the first or second time, send a specific invitation to those property owners, say, your property is being discussed at the next planning commission meeting, and at least give them something in their mailbox that says, we invite you to join us since your property is going to be discussed.
Or could we do it as a special working session? Or, I don't know what you call it to make it legal, what?
Study session?
Yeah, a study session that just involves the board members and them. I mean, there's probably got something to do with Open Meetings Act here, but it would be nice to be able to collaborate.
Short answer to your questions is I don't know if it's legal or not. All of our township meetings are subject to OMA, which means that all of our township residents and business owners are more than welcome to stop in at any time and discuss any of the agenda items. They are all published, they all are noticed, so everybody has equal opportunity to make themselves aware of it. I don't know, I guess I would ask Todd whether or not we could legally send out, I mean, that's kind of what we do with a public hearing anyways. When we held the public hearing for the last zoning ordinance amendment, those residents that were going to have rezoning were all notified, and everybody 300 feet from them were all notified, and that's the time we discussed it. Whether or not they choose to inform themselves before that, I guess it's their decision. I don't know if reaching directly out to current landowners and asking their opinion is something that we're able to do or should do in best practices, but I can definitely look and see if that's an option for you guys.
We have to remember, too, everything was publicized.
Correct, yeah.
Everything was open, all the residents showed up. We had quite a few residents there at the time. I don't remember too many objections to anything, and actually our residents put this together for us.
I would also just say that when you're making zoning changes, you're not necessarily making it for the current property owners, you're making it for the township as a whole. And, you know, for one reason or another, the 7 of you were appointed to your positions because you're trusted to do that. So I don't know that.
That would be more on the selective side.
Yeah, well, you get to a
No.
sticky situation fairly
Right.
quickly, and I don't know what's allowed and what's not allowed, to be completely honest with you. So I would caution you to it, but doesn't mean you can't do it. I'll ask legal whether or not that's an option for you.
You know, I think clearly I guess I'll speak for myself, but probably for the majority here, if not all, I mean, our intent is to deliver what the community wants. You can only get that when community shows up and participates. We can only do so much to do that, and
And they
almost what
did.
you
They
said
gave up a
earlier,
lot of time and effort.
And there was a lot of time and effort put in, and, you know, so at some point, we got to make decisions that are right for the community the best that we can, and reality is, probably every time we make a decision, there's somebody not happy with it, and it's pretty hard to find one that everybody's going to be happy with, so that's going to be just back on us. I think we have to do our best effort to get what the community as a whole wants, and that really needs to be the determining factor, and then, you know, I guess I'm hearing from a lot of us, you do all you can to minimize harm to anybody along the way, and so we got to factor that in, and, you know, that'll have to be a piece, but I think that's where we got stumbled up through that last round. Right, wrong, or otherwise, we got stumbled by, you know, some property owners, and, you know, understandably so. Whether that left us with the right decision or wrong decision, I guess, is what we got to come back at and figure out what we think is best long-term. But I think we need to get it back on the table in a broad enough scope so we can work our way back down to end up with an ordinance and that we feel is best for the community.
Yeah, and I think the activity centers really are a sea change for the community. I mean, it really does have the capacity to change how the community functions, and I think it takes it in a really positive direction. But I don't know how quickly we can do that and cover all of our bases properly.
And I think right there is the key point, it's how quick, and depending on what we put in the ordinance and how that's written will dictate how quick it may or may not happen, and that's where we have to come to bear on how quick we want it to happen, and or how much time we want to allow it to happen for the sake of the community and as many individuals as possible. And I'm sure there's a way we can get very close, but to your point, Dan, it's probably going to be more of a lose, I don't want to call it lose. It's going to be pain is what it's going to be.
Well, a good compromise is when nobody's happy.
I think the broad questions you folks will need to answer is how fast you want to move and if you want to treat all activity centers the same. And I think those two answers will help dictate your methodology in doing so. If you want to take a slow approach, choose one, make slow changes to it. If you want to do it all at once, pick all three or two and make large changes to it. It's just a matter of the speed at which you want to implement some of the items in the subplan.
Only because you commented all three, I guess, just so we don't make it too broad. I think we were all the way across the board, maybe in full agreement. I don't know if we need to look at all three. I think that
Sorry,
Hamlet can probably
just have
stand.
it,
I think
yeah.
it's just the two, just so we don't need to, I think we were already there comfortably all the way around on
Okay,
that. So it could be, looking at the two and then figure out.
A third of them are done then. We can put a check mark on it.
Yeah.
33% on the way there.
Yeah, I think we just need to start. I think we're in agreement, we're going to do it. We need to start. So I don't know, how do you have just start back at the beginning with the 10,000 foot view of, where the changes might best be
Sure.
looked at and go
I could
from
bring back
there.
material, like education material on how overlay zones work and those types of things, so you guys have a better idea what mechanisms you could implement, and maybe it'll give you a better idea of how fast to do those types of changes and what the current status is.
And potentially, Cody, I don't remember which month the meeting was, but we did have a meeting where we discussed whether we would keep them, all three together. We made the decision to keep the two together, and the consequences of that. Maybe that was a right decision then, maybe a wrong decision. Maybe we pick up with that conversation again to, do we keep the two together or not, and the reasons for, the reasons against, and what the hurdles will be, and then as we get into those hurdles. But I think maybe we've got to go back to that point in time.
Yeah, that's...
And then maybe we keep the same decision and keep them together, or we make a different decision and break them apart.
So what that's sounding like to me, as far as a deliverable for me to prepare for you for next meeting, is give you guys kind of a current status of how everything's working in the North and West Activity Center, and our different options moving forward of how to implement the subplan, and kind of have a recentering of those main topics and going from there.
And then I think a lot of the things that happened after that will still fall in place and move through more
Sure.
quickly, but I think we've got to go back to that point, and then hopefully the entire process doesn't have to occur again, because some of those decisions we made will say, yeah, that still holds, leave it in.
Sure, makes
and
sense.
move on.
Yep, we can do that.
Are we going to do this at a workshop?
I would propose that you do it at your next regular meeting. You don't have any public hearings. No, you won't have any public hearings at your next meeting, so we'll just have agenda items like we did tonight.
And then, like, Dan, if you have, questions or any of us, submit them to Cody so we can at least address them somewhat. And then, it helps us out as board members too. We bring our questions in here, but if we get them, with our board packet, it gives us time to, hey, well, Dan's thinking this or that, or maybe I should look at this. It just kind of helps the process. Just suggestion.
If there's specific things you guys would like to see, please email them to me, and I will be happy to put together material for you so that we can all be on the same page.
So are you suggesting that the questions that we have for Cody before the meeting, that they be published to all the other board members? Is that what you were asking?
No.
Oh.
What I'm saying is, if you feel that something needs to be addressed that's major on any issue, let us know what we can look into and, to help this move along, help the meetings move along. Just suggest it.
All right, I think, are we good to move? Okay, all right.
Got a handle?
So that brings us back to our next public comment period. Same rules as last time.
All right, so I don't have it. I speak very loudly. So I just wanted to come back because I was here a while back. I don't need that. I was here a while back to, as were other people from my neighborhood, asking about Rain Tree 4, or saying we were here for the STRs, right, and to see where it would go. So I just wanted to update you all and know that I think there were 22 families in our subdivision put in money, and we have sued all 4 of the STRs in our neighborhood. And we've won on 3. One of them wants to go all the way, well, we won. We've had judgments for all 3 to stop, and the 4th one wants to go to court. So we'll know in early July if Judge Elsenheimer makes a decision on that, because it's 3 of them he already did. So, but I guess the reason I wanted to tell you is I know that's a township board issue. I've talked to Ron, so Kevin, you'll be hearing from me in July. But I just wanted to say, if it ever does come back to you, that it's a burden, right? It's a burden on the neighbors. We had 22 people, but it's about $7,500 right now, and will be more if we have to go all the way through to court with the final person. So just saying that. And then I can't stand it, so anybody who doesn't know I've been on the planning commission has to know. I said I'm so glad that I had somebody sitting next to me, because it drives me crazy, because I want to be able to be part of it. So one of the things I wanted to say about the square footage thing is, if you have a ranch, so my house is a couple levels and then a basement. So the main level I don't think is quite 1,000 square feet, but let's say it is. And I want to put ADU in my basement, I would have to leave out a closet or something to meet it. So I wonder if there's some, when you're thinking of the ones that are in the home, that you might consider, what is the level, I don't know if it's a percentage or what it is, but something so it makes sense, like you would use your whole basement, right? So that was one of them. And then I just wanted to say, nobody mentioned talking to the assessor about the PRE. Having been a treasurer, I just want to say that she may have something that could advise you about, because I don't think you can keep 100% if it's, yeah, right, okay. So I wanted to make sure everybody knew that. And that might be something to ask Angela about, for sure. Let's see, let's make sure anything else I had to say. Oh, the only other thing is, how we did the shoreline, when you were talking about the last thing, what's it called, activity centers. Remember how we did the shoreline, where there were 3, we had people that came, specific people came, and you had no more than 3 planning commission members? Just something to consider at some point if you do want to bring in specific people or owners to that. And other than that, I think that was it. See, Matt, it wasn't so bad.
Thanks, Tina.
Oh, I'm 10120 Deer Path. South.
Chris Crew, 3016 Collier Road. On the ADUs, you guys talked about an attached at a certain level, 1,000 square feet, or 1,000, or an acre, excuse me. And then the other thing I was thinking of as you're going through it, there are people like Pete and people like Lloyd who have property that well exceeds what you would ever need to, and certainly they could split it off. We know that people won't want to do that necessarily, but if you were to look at the 1 acre, I'll use the low-density residential, 1 acre minimum, if their parcels were 2 acres, in theory they could split them off. In theory, they could build 2 conforming size homes with all the necessary setbacks, waxing out maybe road frontage in the case of Lloyd, or in the case of lakefront, they'd have to have 200 feet worth of lakefront, but they could, at that point in time, build a standalone house at the same size that would be allowed if they actually split it off. So that way you could get detached units. You could get a bigger house if If you had 10 acres, you could have the equivalent of a house that is a full size on 5 of his acres, and 5 of his acres would be his primary house. In Lloyd's case, he could have a home, because he's got 10, he could have a home that's 3,000 square feet in addition to his home that's 2,000 square feet. So maybe if you had the correct size of parcel that allows two houses on it, maybe that would be a way to get houses of a bigger size at that larger size. If I, for example, as an example, my house is 3/4 of an acre on the lake. The house next to me is 1.75. If I were to buy that, annex that, in theory, I could build an ADU on that property because I'd have 2.5 acres or 2, whatever it would be. And there's 300 feet worth of frontage. So in theory, I could put another house on that as an ADU, as opposed to building a house. I want another house. So that might be something to consider to give you the how to build a bigger house on a property, especially if you've got these larger lots. The other thing I was thinking too, as you're going through this in the invitations to a property owner, if you extend an invitation specifically to a property owner and a business that's going to be impacted by a zoning change, you better plan on inviting everybody that's impacted by every zoning change, because you can't exclude me when you decide to change zoning for a lake residential, and you can't exclude Kay when you decide to change low-density residential. You'll have to make that invitation. You can't do one without the other. Otherwise, you'll get in trouble. And then remember that the change to the zoning for the activity center impacted, and there were 3 people that it impacted. When they changed, it was general business that were impacted. It was Adam, it was the Dollar General, and it was Sunny. And they don't even live in the township. Nobody lives in the township here. That was part of that. It was businesses that were impacted. It wasn't residents. I think there was misinformation that was shared amongst the property owners in that area, that they were going to lose their property, they weren't going to be able to do things, etc. But it did ratchet down some of the things in the local business. You guys decided to make it roll the general business into local business because it made the changes to the ordinance more homogeneous, and it was easier to keep the general business off of 72 as opposed to trying to commingle and do all of that in general and local business. So, for what it's worth, 3 property owners. And yes, it did suck. It would suck. It would suck for anybody that has a zoning ordinance change that impacts them. And every time you make one, somebody ends up having some form of an impact. Sometimes it's all of the low-density residentials, and sometimes it's some of the shoreline people.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else? All right. Close that public comment period. We're up to reports. Township Board, Kevin?
I'll give just a brief update. Actually, I did not attend the last Township Board meeting. Actually, my mother had passed away the following day, and I was sitting at her bedside that evening. But I did watch the entire meeting and got the notes here. So the key elements that I thought I'd bring forward, there are a couple of administrative things that they worked on are addressed. Just so the public knows, fireworks for July 4th was approved, pending some licensing and permits that need to be procured by the person putting on the fireworks. New walk-in cooler, or upgrade to the system for the walk-in cooler at Twin Lakes was approved, out of the budget, about $15,000, I believe. And then there was a new on-premise, actually it's listed as a liquor license, approved for Fresh Coast Market. And actually what the license is will permit them to serve beer and wine on-premise. So just a change of that activity in the community, and there are a few of those additional licenses that could be available in our township over time, but kind of an interesting note, particularly for us, the Planning Commission. I thought it was probably the most interesting piece in terms of not really a change of use, but a change of use in terms of some things that will occur at that location going forward. So, and that's really the key items from the last meeting.
Thanks, Kevin. Sorry to hear about your mother.
Thank you.
ZBA, Max?
We did have a case this month, parcel on Crescent Shores that bordered both Mickey Lake and Long Lake, was a non-buildable lot. Actually had been before the planning commission previously and got a variance to build on it because there is no building envelope. The waterside setback and the roadside setback overlap. And then someone else had purchased the parcel, so they came back. They actually reduced I think they only asked for a 10-foot variance from the 50 waterside, pushed it a little closer to the road, and it was a small, kept it on the small side so that it was, fit the lot okay, and it was approved. And I do not believe we have a case for July at this point.
All right. Thanks, Max. Planner update report?
Yeah, so I just got a brief update. Last Planning Commission meeting, there was authorization to do a tree preservation committee. I met with Commissioner Murphy on that regarding our approach. The first meeting date for that will be July 9th at 2 p.m. We're approaching it kind of in a 3-meeting structure currently. The first is to discuss kind of the existing mechanisms in the zoning ordinance. The second of which is to provide further investigation and identify gaps that we might have with the NFI coming up. And then the third meeting would be to discuss possible methods of implementation after investigation and identifying the areas we need to address. With that, GEI is still in the middle of finishing up their field verification. I talked with Zach last week, and they've done some on-the-ground work so far this summer. There's more to come. Eventually, they're going to ask private landowners for permission to access their property to do some more field verification. So we'll update you as that comes. Commissioner Murphy, I apologize. You submitted a letter, and I didn't call it out on the agenda, but it is in the packet, and you can speak further to it here in Commissioner comments, but it's part of our tree preservation discussions that we've had. So that's the update for me.
Thanks, Cody.
I do have a question, if I could, on that. The tree preservation meeting, where will the location be and how many commission members are going to be present? So if any of us wish to attend, we still may, as long as we don't.
It'll be here at the Township Meeting Hall.
We just need to make sure we don't create a quorum with.
Correct. Commissioner Murphy so far is the only one commission member that's agreed to be there. So if 2 other folks would like to be there, we can have up to 2 more folks. So if you do want to be there, please email me so we don't accidentally create a quorum. But please, your input is valued. So if you're able to make it, I would be greatly appreciative.
Thank you. Under correspondence, we have 2 items from Kay Gallagher. Just pointing that out, it'll be part of the record. Commissioner comments, I guess we'll start at Sherry. We do have your letter too, so.
Right, and I won't read the letter. I'm just trying to take a proactive approach with this and looking for your comments before we commence our first meeting. Negative, positive, anything you want to throw at us to take a look at, we greatly appreciate it.
Thanks. So I'm just curious how many volunteers are signed up?
We currently haven't noticed it. Commissioner Murphy and I met last week, I believe, and I haven't had a second to get the word out other than putting the agenda together for tonight's packet. So this week there'll be a notice that goes out and invite public to come discuss.
Okay. Cool. Anybody comments? I'll just go down the line. Tim, Dennis, Max, Kevin, Dan? I don't have any either then, so I guess we'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion by Sherry, support by Kevin to adjourn the meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned at 8:30.